Hello folks and welcome to Checkpoint Charlie. So folks, this is Checkpoint Charlie, the famous border crossing within central Berlin. Now it's called Charlie after the NATO phonetic alphabet, nothing to do with Charlie Chaplin or this guy here being called Charlie. It's the NATO phonetic alphabet. So Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo, and then Checkpoint Charlie here in the center of Berlin. But why do we have checkpoints in Berlin? Why is this one remaining? There are 80 checkpoints in Berlin, and by the time the Berlin Wall got erected in 1961, there were just 12. And Checkpoint Charlie became very important because this was the border crossing for foreigners and also military personnel as well. Checkpoint Charlie was also the center point for the Cold War Tank Standoff. It happened just a few months after the Berlin Wall came up. So that happened on these streets we can see just here. So just a few months after the Berlin Wall came up, a diplomat was crossing through Checkpoint Charlie from the American sector into the Soviet sector. Now, ever since the end of the Second World War, when the powers met, so America, Russia, Britain and France, they came together and made the Four Powers Agreement. And in that, it declared that diplomats could travel between all the sectors completely allowed. The cars actually have a special number plate. And so you see this at the border controls and you flag the car through, absolutely fine. But an American diplomat was coming through Checkpoint Charlie and was stopped by the Soviet forces on their side. Now he wasn't on some secret spy mission, he was just going to the opera over in East Berlin. But he was stopped, and this really made the Americans quite angry. And so the next diplomat making his way into the Soviet sector through Checkpoint Charlie was surrounded by an armed military personnel. And of course, nobody then tried to stop them. Thinking it was over, the Americans let through another diplomat, but then he too was also stopped. And now the Americans thought, what can we do to make sure this stops happening? This is very annoying. We need to show some real strength to show the Soviets that we won't let this happen anymore. And they went quite far. They brought 30 tanks to Checkpoint Charlie. They stood just meters from their side of the border. They were revving their engines and sending plumes of black smoke all through the streets we see here today. The Soviet forces responded in the exact same way. They also brought their tanks to Checkpoint Charlie and stood on their side of the border. And the world held its breath. It was on the brink of a Third World War, this Cold War Tank Standoff. But luckily for them and us today, nobody wanted a Third World War. And so you actually had frantic negotiations taking place between JFK and the White House with the Kremlin using secret back channels they only just opened up about a month before, and they agreed to stand down. To save face to the Americans, they said to the Soviets, can you move your tanks first? And they agreed that they would. But they did so in a really cheeky way. They moved back one of the tanks just a few meters. So the Americans thought we can play that game and moved back one of their tanks just a few meters. It's like a slow game of chess. All the tanks were taken away from the checkpoint and all the pieces were taken away from the board. And the world let out a huge sigh of relief. It had avoided a Third World War with like Cold War Tank Standoff that took place here at Checkpoint Charlie. And really that was the only notable huge event that took place at Checkpoint Charlie where the world's eyes were zoned in on this location. Now it is early at the moment, it's early on a Saturday morning and the sun is starting to shine because usually here it's very busy and full of tourists wanting to get a photo over there by the checkpoint. In Checkpoint Charlie today, you have the black box exhibition, so you can wander around inside there and find out more about what happened at this checkpoint. And also on the outside of this, I think it's a temporary exhibition still, you'll find information boards and they'll detail more about things like the Cold War Tank Standoff. Across the other side of the road, this large circular building is a panorama. You actually stand in the middle of an interactive picture, and then the idea is you immerse yourself in what it was like here at the checkpoint when it was standing. But let's have a closer look at the checkpoint. So right now we're on the east side, and then we're coming up to the Checkpoint Charlie replica. This was only a replica erected by the Museum which is just behind the checkpoint on the side here, the Checkpoint Charlie Berlin Wall Museum. Now, up until the summer of 2019, you could stand here and have your photo taken with actors. They were wearing military uniform, but it was shut down by the Berlin Council because they were asking for a fixed amount of money as a tip, and that isn't allowed in Berlin. Now, usually it's very busy here, but we are quite early in the morning. And so we've got a great little spot here where we can see this replica of Checkpoint Charlie on the American side. They've got some sandbags and this replica of the hut, which is kind of what it used to look like and kind of in the right position. On the checkpoint here, you can also look inside and it will tell you some of the history of what took place here. Now, also at the checkpoint, you'll find these big pictures. So on this side, looking into the west, is a soldier, a Soviet Union soldier. No one actually knows who he is. He's a bit of the unknown soldier, not the famous unknown soldier, but they're not sure if he was an actor or he was indeed an actual soldier in the army. And on the other side, this guy here is an American soldier, and he's looking into former East Berlin. So although this is a replica, it's a great example of what the checkpoint would have been like. On the American side, which was a small hut with a flagpole, very simple, and on the Soviet side, so in East Berlin, it was very complex. There was zigzag roads to ensure that cars had to slow down as they went through. In later years, there was actually a shed where you go through in your vehicle. Now, the reason why it was kept simple on the American side is because they didn't consider this a border. They didn't consider this an international border. Which I like today. Well, it is a fascinating place. You can come down here and look at just part of what the border control crossing would have been like, and you can explore the museum behind it. And as I mentioned, the information boards all around here, the black box exhibition, are quite interesting. But if I'm really honest with you guys, it's not that impressive when you come here. It's very touristy. It's quite loud. It's probably the busiest place in terms of tourists because it is a street. You know, it wasn't designed for tourists to come here. So it can be a bit disappointing when you do come down here. And also when it is busy here, especially in the summer, you have to be very careful of pickpocketers. That doesn't happen very often in Berlin, but if I ever hear people having something stolen, it's usually in this part of the city because you are so close together. And then also there are quite a few scams as well. So if you wander around here, you may see people with a clipboard asking for money for a school for the deaf, which sounds incredible, but it is a scam, and you can sign your signature and these people will then demand you give them money, quite a lot of money. And I see it happening quite a lot here, well, I used to before the pandemic. And then also there's gambling, street gambling that takes place, which obviously is rigged. So if you do come down here, just be aware that goes on and don't get involved.